All right, let's keep going. This is part 3 of our video lecture on chapter 10. Now we're looking at some of the achievements of the Tang and the Song dynasty of China. And the Tang dynasty, they tried to fix one of the major flaws that the Han dynasty was never able to fix, and that is land distribution. And they try to reform their land in the sense of taking land away from the rich and giving it to the poor. This land redistribution, because you do not want a wage gap. You don't want all land and wealth accumulated in the hands of a few wealthy aristocratic, land holding families. And I also want to point out that one of the new things we see in China during this time is what we call the what is this called? The steppes? No, terrace. There you go. The terrace farming, right, which is the kind of like steps carved into the mountainsides. The Mayans used it, and then the Chinese used it, and other people are going to use it as well. The Incas are going to use it, and this kind of just maximizes the amount of land that you can put to cultivation when you live in a mountainous area. All right, so the tank policy is called the equal field system. And the idea was that they passed laws to kind of limit how much land a wealthy person can own, and a wealthy family could own. And by putting limits on the wealthy, it allowed many of the commoners or the peasants to be able to purchase and become landowners themselves. And the fact is that when you are your own business owner, you are your own landowner, you tend to work harder because you see the profits directly, right? So imagine, for example, you worked in McDonald's, right? And if you worked in McDonald's, they might tell you work harder, work faster, work better, right? And whether you serve 100 people or you serve 10 people, you're going to get paid the same, right? You're going to get paid the $8, $9 an hour. So you don't see a benefit in increasing how good or how fast you work. But if you're the owner of the McDonald's, right, and you get paid more because you're able to sell more, then you're going to work harder and to sell more. And that's the same thing with land, right? If you produce land for someone else, like you work for a landowner, you get paid your wages, right? But you don't really benefit. You don't see the profit. And the Tang Dynasty realized this. And they said, okay, we can actually, by limiting the land that wealthy can accumulate and giving land or separating land or redistributing land for the poor, right? Those poor people, they're going to work their hardest to improve their status. They're going to work really hard. And for a long time, the Tang Dynasty was able to reduce the wealth gap, right? And this is kind of the same mentality, for example, that the Byzantine Empire had with the theme system, right? Where peasants were able to serve in the military in exchange for land ownership, right? This attempt to stop the wealth gap from widening. And it worked for a while, temporarily. And the economy of the Tang expanded because there's more production, because people are more productive. But the problem was that eventually the rich were able to bribe the government and were able to accumulate more land, and eventually we see the wealth gap get bigger and bigger, and that causes problems as peasants don't like that. So we see increased agricultural productivity. There's a lot of inventions and new technologies that further expand agriculture. One thing we see the use of fertilizers in the sense of human and animal manure. So that means your human waste, your animal waste, you put it into the soil, and the nutrients and the minerals in that manure will now fertilize your crops, and it'll grow. You'll get more production from the crops. We also see that a lot of irrigation systems are going to be expanded. One of the major ones is the water wheel. I don't have a picture, but the water wheel allows for water to be distributed more evenly amongst your crops, right? Easier way to water your crops. We see pumps, right? So you're able to pump water from deep underground from wells and pump it out into the surface. And like I mentioned before, the terraces. So all these new technologies, all these new methods of agriculture are going to increase food production. But the most important thing that happens is the introduction of a type of rice called champa rice. Champa rice comes from the northern part of Vietnam, a region called Champa. And this Vietnamese rice is special because it ripens really fast. And that means that you can harvest it twice a year. So that means in the same amount of land, you can produce double the amount of crops, double the amount of food, right? And that all that food surplus, of course, besides the obvious of increased population, we see that that food surplus will allow more and more people to work in other industries besides farming. And we see this what we call or the book calls a proto-industrialization. So that means that there's people whose job is to kind of go to not necessarily a factory, but just like a workshop and make stuff, whether it's tools or weapons or jewelry or clothing or whatever, porcelain, right? Stuff that you're going to trade, stuff that you're going to sell, stuff that you're going to export. And all this is possible because of all these advancements in food production, right? Agriculture production. And the wealthiest or the most agriculturally rich part of China, which is the southern half of China, is going to be able to transport all this surplus throughout China thanks to the Grand Canal. All right, so we see how the Sui dynasties established, the construction of the Grand Canal is now benefiting during the Tang dynasty and the Song dynasty. So all this food means that less people have to be farmers, which means more people go to the cities, and that's what we call urbanization, right? Increased population in urban centers. And China becomes the most urbanized civilization in the world at this time, right? In the post-classical era. More people live in Chinese cities than anywhere else, right? So, the Islamic Empire might be the second one, the second place and most urbanized. So like places like Baghdad and Cairo and Cordoba, huge cities, right? But not as big as Chang'an, right? The capital, 2 million people there. Hangzhou, another one, 1 million people there. And these cities are going to become trade centers. Chang'an is the starting point of the Silk Road. Hangzhou is a port that connects, China to the Indian Ocean trade network. So trade is going to make the cities grow wealthier, right, and grow bigger in size, right? And we see a similar pattern in the Abbasid Caliphate, right, where places like Baghdad are going to become the political, economic, and cultural centers of that empire. And we have all these merchants and artisans and craftsmen, not farming people living in these cities. And of course, government officials are going to be working in the cities as well. We also see a lot of new technologies. Probably the most famous one is gunpowder. So gunpowder originally, the story goes, the legend goes, that it was Taoists who were trying to mix chemicals to try to figure out how to create something that will provide eternal life, or what they call the elixir of eternal life. And as kind of like a ironic twist, instead of developing what provides eternal life, they invented something when you put fire, this powder that when you put fire to it, heat to it, it blows up. And this is, of course, gunpowder. And the first kind of like application of gunpowder for the Chinese was through fireworks. They invented fireworks. And then they kind of started, military people started saying, okay, we can use this for explosives. So kind of like, what we call dynamite. So it wasn't, they didn't have like, pistols and rifles and cannons. Those come later on, right? This very primitive gunpowder technology, when the Chinese first invented, is going to be, just put a pile of gunpowder and let it explode and, blow up a wall so you can, conquer a city or something like that. Firearm technology will slowly develop, but not much, right? This is brand new technology. Most people didn't know what to do with it. One other thing we see is the development of steel metallurgy. And steel is stronger than iron. It's more flexible than iron. It's lighter than iron, which means you could build bigger bridges across larger rivers. You can build or have iron weapons and iron tools and steel weapons and steel tools and steel armor, right? Which is going to help your military and help your farmers. And the Abbasids are going to have steel as well. The Indians are going to have steel as well. And this will become kind of this major export, right? Because everyone's going to want to have steel, which is better than iron. And to do this, you need to have technology of furnaces, right? To be able to melt down those iron ore into steel, mix it with carbon, or mix the iron ore with carbon, and the end result is steel. So, like I mentioned already, the population is going to grow. So China is going to have the fastest growing population in the world. China is going to become the most populous country in the world at this time, thanks to this rice, the champa rice, and they're gonna that pattern is gonna stay the same for the rest of history, right? Up to the 21st century, China was, is, and probably will always be the most populous country on Earth. And again, they were also very urbanized. And these cities, they were cosmopolitan, right? These cities had a whole bunch of people living in there, not just Chinese, but you had people from Southeast Asia, you had people from Central Asia, you had people from India, you had people who were Muslims, you had people who were Christians, you had Buddhist people, and they're all living, or Japanese people, they're all living in these huge Chinese cities, right? These urban centers. And you're gonna people are gonna have like a city life, right? You go out to a restaurant, you go to the theater, stuff like that, and very few other places, very few cities around the world at this time are going to be able to match what the Chinese were having with their cities. All right, this is one of those major cities, Guang Zhao. Again, it is a port city. You see all the walls that they've built for protection. All right, so that's it for part 3. See you next time.